Here's a big question. Is the US equity market too big, and is it too concentrated in big tech companies like Nvidia, Amazon, Apple? It's a question that we've been increasingly getting from investors. So Guillaume, should we be concerned, or is big better?
Tom, it's definitely on everyone's mind at present. As we've seen, global equity markets have become more concentrated. Two areas in particular. The US has become a bigger proportion of global equity markets, and within that, the technology sector has become much larger. But actually, this is not unusual and unprecedented.
So you say it's not unusual, but the US equity market represents about 60% of global equity markets, which is just huge. So is that not unusual?
Actually, the US equity market, if you look through history, has consistently been the world's biggest stock market. Over the past 50 years, was briefly overtaken by Japan in the late 80s, but it was actually 70% of global equities back in the 70s. So 60% as a share is more or less in line with averages. Also, it's worth considering that these days the US stock market is not just a reflection of the US economy. As we know, the US stock market is the favorite destination for foreign companies to go on list. And obviously, those large US tech companies have very large footprints outside of the US.
Okay, so that's interesting context. So the US equity market has always been like the biggest stock market in the world for the most part, apart from a brief blip in the 1980s. But what about the fact that it's now very concentrated in the technology sector? So not only is it the biggest market in global equity markets, but it also is really concentrated in US tech. So when you combine those two bits together, does that actually make it a bit more problematic?
Yes, you're right. US tech companies, like those Magnificent Seven, have become a huge proportion of the US equity market. Those seven companies, representing 30% of the overall market. But we think that concentration in tech is not actually just a US phenomenon. We've seen this in other markets, particularly in Asia, where tech is about 25%, not too far behind the US, and even in Europe, where it's risen to 20%. So, it's fair to say that increasing concentration always going to increase the risk around that. And we saw similar concentration during the tech bubble of the 2000s. I guess in terms of whether that's a problem, it is not if the fundamentals sort of stack up, which is what we're seeing at the moment. A lot of these tech companies have seen their profits surge in recent years, and that's really the main difference with the 2000s. So, yeah, the message is that it's reassuring that US outperformance that we've seen is consistent with better growth in profits, in earnings, in what are essentially fastest growing industries. And it's not just about AI, but also the focus on consumer and advertising, which is very strong.
I mean, it's insane how big some of these tech companies are, but these are like globally integrated businesses that just operate globally. Even though they list in the US, they are truly global in the way they operate. So back to the original question, Guillaume. Is big better when it comes to US tech and US tech sector and US equity more broadly?
Well, it can never be a clear yes or no, but in terms of the US, as we've said, it's always been a big proportion of the global equity market. That might not be the case forever, but it's certainly not unusual if you look at history. In terms of tech, over the past 200 years, what we've seen is the biggest industry represented in the stock market at each point in time has always been a reflection of the major driver of economic growth at that time. In the 1950s, it was energy. Today, it's, the economy we're in is increasingly a tech-centric global economy. So it's understandable that those companies benefit.
Okay, so this is, in some respects, a lot of this is just a reflection of the times, and of course, markets and the global economy changes, but it's not necessarily a cause for concern. Guillaume, thanks so much for your time today. Really interesting stuff. I feel like we've covered all the ground and gone back in history a little bit. And of course, thanks everyone for watching, and we'll be back again next week with another episode.